Bible Stories with Miss Cortney. Episode 1, The Very First Christmas. Hi friends, and welcome to the first ever episode of Bible Stories with Miss Cortney. I'm so glad you're here. I really enjoyed reading stories with you on Storytime with Miss Cortney, and I heard from a lot of you that you were loving it too. And so I thought, how much fun would it be if we started reading and learning more about Bible stories together? The Bible is the most important story in the whole world. And did you know that the Bible is made up of a lot of little stories? So it's a really big, important story that's made up of lots of little stories. There are stories about everything in the Bible. Stories about daring adventure, stories about friends, stories about kings and queens, and stories about brave shepherds. There are happy stories and sad stories, calming stories and exciting stories, silly stories, and even some scary stories. And all of these stories make up one great big story. And that's the story of God's great love for you. Because you are God's child. So this story, that's the most important story in the whole wide world, is also your story. How cool is that? It's the story of how God created you, how God introduced Jesus to the world for you, and what God made you to do. That's love others. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started reading. The Bible stories that we're going to be reading this episode and the next 7 episodes come from the book called The Tiny Truths Illustrated Bible. And it was created by Joanna Rivard and Tim Penner. Look how cute those Bible characters are. I just love it, and I think you're going to too. Our first story is called The Very First Christmas. I love Christmas, don't you? God's people had been scattered and were far apart, a bit like the stars in the sky. They didn't have a land of their own, and they didn't have a king who looked after them. So they were here, waiting for a powerful rescuer who would be strong and battle their enemies for them. But God had a very different idea. This king wasn't going to be at all what they were expecting. He would be so much more. Who do you think is the king that God is sending? It all started when an angel visited Mary. Mary was an ordinary girl. Ordinary means normal, so Mary was just like me and you. Mary was an ordinary girl who was going to marry a man named Joseph. They were going to have an ordinary life, or so she thought. Mary, said the angel, God has chosen you to have a baby who will change the world. He is God's son. This came as a big surprise. Can you imagine? But Mary loved God and she trusted God. So she said, yes, I will do whatever God wants. Not long afterward, just as the angel had said, Mary found out that she was pregnant. When the baby was about to be born, Mary and Joseph had to go on a long journey. The emperor had sent everyone back to their hometowns to be counted. Joseph was from King David's town, Bethlehem. Remember good King David? He and Joseph were from the same family. So off to Bethlehem went Joseph and Mary and soon to be born baby. How do you think Mary and Joseph were feeling on this journey? The little town was packed full of visitors, and Joseph and Mary needed somewhere to stay, somewhere for Mary to have the baby. When they found a place, it wasn't fancy. In fact, it was the place where animals slept. But there, with the sheep and the goats and the donkeys, the baby was born. The promised baby, the one the angel had told Mary about. The name they gave him was Jesus. God had sent his son to be born as a tiny little baby, and Jesus was going to change everything. This was the biggest, most glorious news in the whole wide world. Who would God tell first? A king? Maybe a queen? Who do you think God told first? Who would you tell first if you had the biggest, most glorious news in the whole entire world? Who would God tell first? A king? Or maybe a queen? No. God told a group of shepherds. They were poor and dirty, and nobody thought they were very important. They were out in their fields watching their sheep and minding their own business. But all of a sudden, angels appeared. The sky was full of them. They were bright, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. They had important news. A baby has been born, they shouted. He is God's son. He will bring great joy to the whole world. God is glorious, great, and wonderful. The shepherds knew exactly what to do. Leaving their sheep behind, they ran as fast as they could to find the baby. And there he was, exactly where the angels said he would be. Once they had seen him, they rushed to tell everyone what had happened and what the angels had told them. This baby was God's son, and he would be the rescuing king. Back in the fields, they sang songs to God, telling him how amazing he was. What song would you sing to God to celebrate baby Jesus' birth? When Jesus was born, a special star appeared in the night sky. Far away from Bethlehem, 3 wise men called Magi saw the star and knew exactly what it meant. They had been waiting, just like God's people. Now that the waiting was over, they wanted to see the new king. So they set out on a long journey, following the star that would take them to Jesus. When they found him at last, the Magi were overjoyed. They gave him special gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, then bowed down because they knew who he was. You see, they knew that he was a special king, the special king that God's people had been waiting for, the one that God had promised to send. The new king had finally arrived. What gift would you have given baby Jesus? I bet you came up with great answers to my questions, including what gift you would give baby Jesus. We just read about how God sent his people a rescuing king, a king who was even more than they were expecting. Who was that king that God sent? That's right, it was Jesus. The people were expecting a king like all the other kings, strong and good in battle against their enemies. But they got much, much more with Jesus. They got a strong king, a king that loved them and showed them how to love one another. Now you might be thinking, Miss Cortney, that doesn't sound very strong. But did you know that it takes a really strong person to love other people? Not strong like muscles, like strong arms and legs, not that kind of strong, but strong inside, like strong in your heart. I think that's an even better kind of strong. Because you know it's easy to love your friends, but think about how hard it is to love the people who have hurt you or made you mad. It takes a really strong person to love those people too. And Jesus is that kind of strong. And he teaches us to be strong like that too. And in the next episodes of Bible Stories with Miss Cortney, we're going to learn even more about Jesus and how strong he is and how he teaches us to be strong just like him. Until then, remember that you are a child of God and you are loved and that you were made strong to love others too. Bye, friends. See you next time.